Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that connects people struggling with STI stigma to mental health resources. And let me also point out that you don't have to be struggling with your mental health, navigating the stigma in order to be connected to these resources. If it's something that you feel perhaps alone in, or if you need additional support that you may not have known you needed, or if there's just like something there and you want to explore this, then this is a really safe space to reach out and get connected to not only therapy, group therapy, or individual, but also just community. So if you're looking for any type of support groups or social groups as we transition into things opening back up in the world, then feel free to reach out, and hopefully we can find you something that is a fit for you and where you are in terms of navigating your diagnosis at all. All right, tonight's guest, we got Rita. Rita, how you feeling?
Good. I'm actually really excited to be a part of this.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I messaged you, or you messaged me actually directly, and well, before we started, you had a question for me. You want to go ahead and ask that question, and then we'll go into like how you reached out and what we ended up talking about through Instagram.
Definitely. So yes, the question I had was, so when I first tested, I tested as positive, and then the subsequent test after that was equivocal, and then after that was equivocal. And so I feel like I'm kind of in between where like the doctors are like, you're negative, you can't give it to anyone, but I have the antibodies. And so I guess my question is that how does someone who is equivocal, who's not necessarily part of the community, but also not part of someone who would consider themselves negative, kind of fit in this kind of community?
In my experience, so I tested negative about a few years before I actually had a symptom and tested positive. And what I noticed was that there was a presence of antibodies. It's not that it was zero, it was just less than the amount that I needed in order to test positive. So I constantly ask this question, like, is it repeat exposure that makes you have an outbreak, or is it longevity of the virus in your system that makes you have an outbreak? Or are these two things that don't even factor in at all? Because clearly it went from what the viral load antibodies were to me being able to experience outbreaks and have a positive test result. So as far as like being equivocal goes, I'm curious to know, what was the time frame in between your two tests for you to have tested equivocal?
Yes. So prior to this, I've tested negative kind of all my life. I've always just kind of made sure that I got tested for herpes, I tested negative. And then I really wasn't intimate with too many people last year. And so that happened around, I think my first test was in November. And I tested as positive. And so I reached out to the people that I was intimate with. Turns out that they were all positive for HSV1. And I was tested positive for HSV2. So, but the doctor was like, your antibodies are so low that you should get tested again. So I got tested again, and that second test was in February. And then they said that it was equivocal. So it was just very low, not low enough to be considered a positive, but considered equivocal. And then I tested again, just like one of my normal gynecologists, because I had a checkup anyway. So I was like, let me just get tested again in March, and it was equivocal again. So in that case, the doctors basically stated that unless I have an outbreak or unless my antibodies ever go up, I will be considered equivocal. So.
And I don't know that means that you're not able to pass it on, or that it means that you'll never have an outbreak. This is a tricky situation, because like, you got tested, you've known your status because you specifically requested herpes, which I'm curious to know, why did you ask for herpes testing to be done?
So my mom's a nurse, so let me start by that. Like, my sex ed, although sex ed failed me and I didn't learn a lot, I mean, more than as much as I should have, my mom went into every single thing. Like, was like, this is what a private part looks like. These are STIs. These are different things. Just because it's herpes doesn't mean that you're going to get it sexually. Like, some people get it as a child, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I've always known, like, there are certain things that are not tested in STI results. And I've always kind of had, like, my doctors considered me kind of a hypochondriac because I'd always have a fear of, like, having something. Like, I'm going to have something. I always come with a whole list. So in order to just kind of calm my own nerves of, like, oh, my gosh, because you always get that fear of, like, oh, what if I have HIV or what if I have herpes and they don't know and they thought they didn't have it or they said they were negative but they might not be negative. And, like, in order to calm my own nerves, I do it just regularly for that.
When you ask for testing regularly, are you met with any resistance at all?
So most of the times I do it through Quest Diagnostic and I just chuck up that $300 in. With this gynecologist that I have now, I didn't get any resistance. I told them I wanted to be tested for everything, and I specifically said herpes and HIV. She's like, are you sure? I guess that was a little bit of resistance, but I was like, yes. And then I had to sign something to be tested for HIV. So.
Oh, I think that what you had to sign was a release waiver that if you test positive for HIV, they have the right to treat you immediately. Like they can put you on treatment immediately.
But I can test, like, so I test myself for HIV a lot anyway. Well, not a lot, but, like, I'll test myself every couple of months through OraQuick. You know, you can buy that on, like, Walgreens or CVS and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you said you were a hypochondriac, but I'm curious to know, is there any particular reason why so adamant about HIV? Or why so adamant about STIs, period, with your testing routine?
So when it comes to, no, I'm a hypochondriac for everything.
Okay.
Let me clarify that. Like, I literally will go to the doctor and be like, my leg hurts and it's been hurting for, like, and it's here, and then the next day it was hurt on the other leg. Does that mean that it's cancer? Like, I'm like a hypochondriac as a whole. I am always super interested in HIV. I've always just was curious about it. I learned about it at a super early age. Yes, there was a lot of fear and stigma around it, but I was just always curious about it. So I don't know. I know, like, you can live a normal, healthy life with any STI, but those are the ones that get the most stigma, right? Those are the ones that you are taught to fear, basically.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious as to why that was. And even with chalking up that $300 for that herpes test on a regular basis too, like that's expensive.
Yeah. I mean, it was $300 for all the testing, but yes, definitely, it is expensive.
Okay, so this wasn't $300 exclusively
just for
testing.
herpes.
Okay.
No.
All right, got it.
For, like, the normal panel, which is, like, you know, the syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and hepatitis, and I think trichomoniasis, it was like $200. It was like an extra $100 for the herpes, which is crazy.
You said it way better than I do. I can never say that word. I just be like trick. I just leave it at trick.
Yeah.
All right. So navigating this space of uncertainty, you don't know if you have it. You don't know if you don't have it. Like, and this was this year? Because right now it's June.
The confirmation test was this year.
Okay. So wait, are you positive or are you still equivocal?
Still equivocal. So I was positive last year, and then for the next following two confirmation tests were equivocal.
Okay. So I'm curious, like, do you tell partners that you tested equivocal? Do you tell partners, like, they might get herpes from you even though you haven't tested positive for it or had an outbreak? Yeah, I haven't run into this before.
So this has actually been an interesting conversation that I've kind of tried to figure out myself. This is still really new to me. And dating in general, to be honest with you, is new to me. I was a late bloomer. But so at first, once I saw that I was equivocal, I, like, bought medicine. Even though I'm not having outbreaks, like, that's the type of person I am. I'm like, I bought medicine. I did all the additional researches. I added myself to all the positive groups. And then when I talked on the phone with people, I just would tell them I'm asymptomatic HSV positive. Like, I would just tell people I was HSV positive. Then I think I've had mentioned I'm equivocal. And ironically, that was the one time that it went unfavoring for me. So, but I'm realizing that a lot of people don't know what equivocal is, right? And in their head, from my understanding, or at least from the feedback that I've been getting, is like, well, equivocal means if you have antibodies, you're positive anyway. Like, it doesn't matter.
What? Let me tell you this. I think someone you're telling that to is going to err on the side of caution. Whereas if people who get maybe an equivocal diagnostic or an equivocal diagnosis, they may look at it and be like, "Oh, it's not positive. All right, going about my business." I can probably see more people being that way than really psychoanalyzing, or not psychoanalyzing, but really analyzing what the details are in a sense of, damn, all right, this is equivocal. It's not positive, it's not negative, blah, blah, blah. And then running through all these scenarios in your head of what if, what it could be. Like, more people, more often than not, I am confident, will just be like, it ain't positive. Wash my hands with it.
Yeah. But I've gotten a lot of people, as I said, when I was just telling people I'm asymptomatic, HSV positive, like, people were still wanting to be intimate with me. And I think when I first got the diagnosis, I was just telling people because even though I knew, like, logically that herpes is a skin disorder, it's super popular, super common, the stigma did get to me, right? My ego did get triggered a little bit in that. And I wanted to feel sexually wanted in that way. And so when I first started telling people and they're like, okay, well, I don't care, I'll just be intimate with you. I was just like, okay, cool. Not that I was like sleeping with a whole bunch of people, but at that time I was like, okay, cool, because this person actually still wants me, even though this is stigmatized. And I'm going to be honest, at first I did feel a little bit like, not necessarily dirty, but I felt contagious, right? And so, but now I'm realizing that if I want to sleep with someone and I want them, and I want an actual relationship with them regardless, I shouldn't be the only one disclosing. We both should be looking at STI results together. We both should get tested together. And I think there's a sense of confidence that comes with that now. Like before, especially as a female, we tend to kind of sometimes get in these sexual situations and being like, I don't really want to do this, but I don't want to say no. But now I'm way more confident in who I am, and I deserve better. And I need to be aware of what I'm putting in my body. Food and like sexually, I need to be aware of that. And so I shouldn't be the only one who's disclosing. You need to show me your results, because most of the time your results are just going to be chlamydia, syphilis, and gonorrhea. And it was, 4 or 5 months ago?
How old are you?
You may not know, and you may be positive for something as well.
How old are you?
Me? Yeah. I'm about to be 30.
Oh, okay. I was like, dang, you young to be like so on top of this and so knowledgeable about it. What's your career? What's your profession?
I'm a therapist.
Okay.
I'm a marriage and family therapist.
Okay. Was there any training for you or any classwork that you've done around STIs, or is it just your mom's experience as a nurse that has kind of guided you to being as knowledgeable as you are?
There wasn't any training. A lot of the training I did on my own, right? So I did get that basic conversation with my mom, but even with my mom being kind of a Christian, being like in the South, there wasn't full details on that, right? It was just like, these are STIs you can get. This is common. You can get it even without having sex. There still was a little bit of fear mongering in that. But I'm that type of person that wants to look up every single thing and find every single thing, and not just on WebMD. Like, I look in the nursing books. I look in like all these different things on my own. That's how I learned so much about HIV. That's how I learned so much about PrEP and PEP and Truvada and like antivirals. Like, most of that's been on my own.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate that. Like that really excites me that you have this eagerness to educate yourself. And it really does give me hope for people who come after us, especially listening to this podcast episode, for people to just know that you can self-educate so that you can advocate for yourself. You know, you go in and you know that you aren't being tested for herpes and HIV, especially as a woman, considering that y'all aren't at risk for HIV, whatever that means, right? to ask these questions. You know to ask them, hey, I would like to be tested for herpes and I want to be tested for HIV. And you know what else you've been tested for. So that's I guess, like, do you have any sort of guidance for someone who perhaps doesn't know how to seek out information? Like for you have your mom as a nurse, and then you went about it like, I want to know everything. So is that just you being a hypochondriac, or is it something that we can transfer over to people who aren't?
Yeah, well, yes, part of it is being a hypochondriac and just being super inquisitive about everything. Like, I was the type of person who would read books and learn about a disorder. I'm like, oh, like the Benjamin Button thing, like that's an actual disorder. And I like looked it up, and that was me. What I will say is this: there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. And you are going to see, it's kind of like when you do a survey, right? You're going to see something on the far left and a lot of stuff on the far right, but you're not going to see a lot of the like real hardcore facts sometimes when you're on the internet. What I would say is this: if you're diagnosed with it or you're wanting to learn more about a specific topic, go to Google Scholars and look for peer review. Look up actual articles, look up actual resources and like results and conclusions to these things. Because those are going to be the facts.
Okay. All right. I'm going to try and make sure to put that in the show notes as well for people to look for scholarly reviewed articles. Is that what we would call it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
And I actually, because I kind of got a little bit prepared for this,
okay.
But I actually looked up 2 of them, and I'll talk about them later on when we get into the further conversation that we had on Instagram.
Yeah, we can do that now. I didn't know it was going to be at the 17-minute mark before we got there, so we can go ahead and get into the conversation.
Okay. So you want me to just kind of go over the story that I encountered? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the story that happened was, I'm in this all-girls group on Facebook, and they talk a lot about using bowel tracts and having cold sores and using Abreva to kind of deal with that. So in that conversation, I brought up, well, how do you guys feel about disclosing when you have cold sores? And the reason I asked that specific question is because I'm in a lot of HSV groups, and that is the huge number one question you hear with people who have HSV, especially genital. How do I disclose? Disclosure is the hardest part. Like, that is the fear. So I asked someone, being on this other side of cold sores, how do you guys feel about disclosure in that way? And I got a lot of misinformed responses. Varying from, well, transmission is rare if you're not having an outbreak. You can't give it to anyone if you're not in an active outbreak. You can't pass it on sexually. It's not considered an STI. Doctors don't test for it, so why should I say anything? And one person even admitting that they transmitted it to somebody, their partner, and they tested positive for it, but they don't have it because they don't have any symptoms. And then one more person said, well, you should be responsible for your own health and there shouldn't be disclosure for anything. People are responsible for your own health, which I don't necessarily agree. I think disclosure should have a conversation, but I can at least respect the fact that, okay, you're responsible for your own health. We both look at STI results and that's what it is. But the rest of those comments felt very much muddled in stigma, muddled in cognitive dissonance, muddled in miseducation,
Yeah. I'm not surprised. A lot of that sounds like denial. Like, it's just flat out denial for people to say you need to be responsible for your own health. And again, this is a HSV group, or is this a women's group?
This is a regular group.
Okay.
They're just girls in the group who have mentioned that they have cold sores.
Yeah, like that's something that I feel like people throw out there to fill out, like, oh yeah, I get cold sores, and kind of look around and see who makes a face because they know that cold sores are herpes. You know what I mean? Like, I hope my face is kind of giving the impression that I'm trying to make here. But like throwing it out there to just fill it out and see what kind of backup or support you'll be able to get after making that comment. Is someone going to be like, oh, I get cold sores all the time? Let somebody be like, oh yeah, I got genital herpes. Ain't nobody going to jump up and be like,
it gets real awkward and quiet.
Yes, exactly. And people don't know how to take it. People perhaps don't know how to like, if they want to share or how to share, or they don't know what to say. Like, people just don't know what to do or say if someone were to offer that. But it is just unfortunately so stigmatized to have the same exact virus with the same exact symptoms, with the same exact treatments from one location to another. And the stigmatization really revolves around how we don't talk about sex. In that,
Yes.
You want to add to it?
No, I agree. I 100% agree. Like, that was one of the things I was thinking about when I just thought about all of the kind of contributing factors to this. Because those same girls who said they don't need to say anything for cold sores were like, but if someone has genital herpes, even if it's asymptomatic, they have to say something.
Yeah.
So it's this idea that at the core of it, herpes is a skin disorder, and the fact that it is in your private region, people get uncomfortable about it.
Yeah.
Sex is so taboo, right? There's this idea of, like, even like when you talk about body count, right? Oh, I've only been with 3 people, or I've only been with 4 people. And especially, I'm only speaking from a female's perspective, but I think as a whole, that conversation comes up. It's like, oh, well, a girl's been with 3 people. Oh no, she's out there, she's a hoe, or she's whatever. And there's so much fear around just sex and the taboo-ness of it. And I think that's a big contributing factor to it.
Yeah. And I'm curious to know too, is this a minority, people of color women's group?
No.
Okay, so it's just like, is there like can you give me the overview of what kind of women are in this group?
Yeah, so they're primarily Caucasian, and most of the people who are responding were Caucasian, and they're basically between the ages of like 23 and 32.
Oh, you don't have to say the name of the group, but like, what's the niche of the group?
The niche of the group is to be, originally it started off as this small little group of female friends that live in a specific area. Most of them have moved, I've moved, but and to be support for one another. It has become a lot bigger now. It's a larger group now, so it's not as supportive in that way. But that was the whole point of it. It's called like No Boys Allowed, where you can vent about like boyfriends and drama and stuff like that.
Okay. I was just curious because I was wondering like what the tone could have been about it, because in private conversations, like, we're Black, the conversation is different for Black people, it's different for minorities, people of color, than it is for white people. And I was just curious to know, like, if there are any parallels that we can look at from how these conversations are being had in different ways. Typically, the response from the Black people that I've spoken to is, I don't want to tell anybody this. I don't want to tell anybody about this. I don't know Black people with cold sores, or anyone who's disclosed to me that was Black and had cold sores. It's never been something that was talked about. I can't even think of anyone that I've seen with them, to be honest. And then when we talk about cold sores with in the, I don't want to say in the white community, that was a weird thing to say for some reason, but with white people, if you see it, it's more like pointed out or called out, and it's like, oh, it's no big deal, I just got cold sore, like, just don't drink after me, if you even get that. And then but when it's genital, where's that like casualness, you know? And, you know, even with Black people, like I said, if there's something present, or I haven't had anyone disclose to me, but with genital herpes, it's one of those things where it's like, I want to avoid talking about this by any means necessary. Like, I don't want to talk about it, and like, if I absolutely have to, I'm still gonna try not to. But that's been like the majority. Obviously, I've spoken to there's Carolyn Tony. She's a Black woman who's polyamorous.
Yes, I love her. She's poly. I'm poly. Yes, cool.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, I guess now that we broke through that, now we get to talk about this. So, when you...
Wait, to add to your thing, it's ironic that you don't hear it in minorities because we are the highest for almost all STIs. And I mean, not even ironic, doesn't make sense, but we're the highest. Like, African American females are 65% more likely to get HSV, HSV2, regardless if they slept with one person or 20.
Yeah.
Like, we are the highest for almost every single STI. And then African American females are just right below bisexual men for HIV. So I just find that super ironic, but I guess it makes sense because it's not being talked about, right?
Yeah, and even with like, we don't have anything that talks about men. It's like women. But where are the men's representation? Even in the survey that I recently conducted for people living with HSV, the men only accounted for 14-something% of people who took the survey. Like, they out here. It's a matter of like, I hate to put this burden on women on top of everything else, but if y'all don't ask us to get tested before we have sex with you, we won't do it.
You hit it on the nail. I was just about to talk about that. Like, I know it may be anecdotal, but statistics aren't showing as much African American men because a lot of African American men are not getting tested. I know African American men right now who have not been tested in like 5 to 6 years, and they're like, I'm good because nothing's showing up on my body. And the girl's good because nothing's showing up on her body. And I'm like, all STIs can be asymptomatic. Like, that doesn't so that doesn't mean anything. So I think you hit the head on the nail on that one.
Yeah, little do they know, because I mean, I had chlamydia and didn't know it was chlamydia until it turned into prostatitis. So like, if I didn't go to the doctor because my pee just wasn't coming out fast, I'd have never known I had chlamydia, and who knows how that would have impacted me later, because the symptoms could have gone away, but I would have still had the virus, right? And it could have just gotten much worse, but I'm thankful that it didn't. And like, I always have to tell even black men that I've trained and as gym clients, like, hey, you should probably go to the doctor about that. It's not normal for you to have been in a car accident at age 14 and your knee's just not been right ever since. And here we are, you telling me you want to be able to squat, or you got to wear a knee brace and walking funny. Dude, you got to go to the doctor. Even if it is like too late to fix it, you can at least find out what is wrong and prevent further damage. And it's the same thing with mental health, but we ain't got to go into that. Like, if ain't nothing broke, we ain't fixing it.
Part of that, yes, let's not go into mental health because I have a whole bunch I can say about that. But I will say part of that, some of it is kind of systemic resources, right? Like, going to the doctor means you have to pay. I paid $300 to get tested, and even when I go to the regular doctor, I still have to pay for additional testing and I have insurance. Right, so you think about disenfranchised groups and not having those financial resources, or even having the education about those things, that kind of contributes to that as well.
Yeah. Ooh. Oh, I wasn't gonna let you slide away from this. So polyamory, navigating polyamory with this middle disclosure that might or might not need to happen. It's so weird to be talking about an equivocal diagnosis.
Yes. And I will say that has hindered me a lot because this is fairly new for me. So it has hindered me in kind of pursuing more of these like polyamorous relationships that I would get into. I haven't quite explored that with the status that I have at the moment. And when I first found out about my status, it kind of pushed me to want to be more monogamous, because it was like, well, I don't want to have to keep disclosing to this many people. And what if the boyfriend wants me, like if I decided to be solo poly, and what if the boyfriend wants me but the girl doesn't, and then I have to explain this, like, it really made things feel a lot more complicated for me, and like maybe I should just go and pick one person and not just disclose to that person and go from there. But now, especially finding her out, I actually just started following her probably like last week, actually. And kind of like looking at how she kind of does things and kind of navigates that world has kind of inspired me to continue doing what I was doing before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I am realizing that a lot of poly people in the poly community at least, are a little bit more receptive to HSV and a little bit more like willing to engage in someone who has HSV because they're like, well, I put myself out there. I know it's gonna, like, eventually I'll probably get HSV, and that's just what it is.
Yeah, the attitude is just like, all right, cool, let's get it out the way then.
Right.
That's not, let me not lie like that. That's not always the case, but it's like once you got it, you can't get it again, you know? But being with multiple partners and having to date and disclose to multiple people, I think that the more options you have, the less rejection hits, the less impact rejection has. And I've not been able to really put that into words before now, but I find that to be the case. If you disclose to multiple people, I think that hearing no among yeses and maybes doesn't hit nearly as hard as when you try so hard to be everything for this other person. You want to impress them on the first date. You went above and beyond. You got dressed up. You bought everything, and you just saying all the right things. And then you go to disclose and they tell you no. It's like shattering. Like it's heartbreaking because you invested so much and you did it under this you had this like covert contract in your mind of, if I present my value like this, then this person is going to choose me. They're going to overlook this flaw that I have, and we're going to live happily ever after. And I don't think that's the case, man. I'm finding like the more real you can be in who you are and be real to other people and let them be who they are, that's what makes you look like that top-notch person. People aren't looking for flashy, top-notch, and all this other stuff. They're looking for real. And when you give somebody real, you know, they're either ready for it or they aren't. It's nothing to do with your herpes status. It's, are they ready for real or are they not ready for real? And then going from there, because an STI diagnosis is just real. You had sex, if you have sex, you are probably going to come in contact with a potential infection, right? If you are breathing around people, you might get a cold. If you go to, like, there's so many different things that just naturally happen, this being one of them, and people look at it like it's not natural, like it's just this monstrous thing that only happens to people who do a negative, something that has a negative association to it. And when we break it down, it's really about sex. People view sex as a negative thing. So when there are no, quote, consequences and the risks are minimized, then it's fine. But whenever it's good sex and it comes with the consequence of, you know, something like an STI that you can't just cure or heal, that's gone, and now you have the possibility of passing it on to someone else, now it's all of a sudden an attack on your sexual identity, and that's really messed up.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's crazy because it's like people don't want to. It used to hurt, I guess, in the beginning, feeling like, well, this person is raw dogging, seasonal language, like people just based off of vibes. But you don't want me, who knows their status, and at this point, I will do what I can do to not give you the status. But you're right. You probably have been, based off of statistics alone, you have been in contact with someone who has herpes. That's just that's statistics alone.
Let's say this. Let's take it one step a little bit deeper. You have probably had sex with someone who's had sex with someone who has herpes. If we can't say you've probably had sex with someone who has herpes, then it's possible that you had sex with someone who's had sex with someone who has herpes. And if that's the case, you know, what does that say? You might get it, you might not get it. That person could have passed it on without even knowing that they had it. Like, there are so many factors here at play, and we just can't get society on the same page about what herpes is, how herpes works, how people with herpes are people, and then they have herpes. They're not people with herpes and like that's their identity now. Nothing changes about us between the time that we have our interaction, our exposure, our concerns, and then our diagnosis. Nothing about who we are changes. And then when we get that diagnosis, it's like everything just flips upside down. And I really want people to get away from it. I'm getting like fired up. I don't know where this came from.
No, keep talking. Like, I 100% agree. It's like, you were not, just like when someone's like, oh, I'm diabetic. No, you are not diabetic. You are somebody who has diabetes. Separate yourself from the actual disorder or disease or virus that you have. You are still 100% that person who you were, all of these amazing things that you brought to the table, all of these, your beauty, all of that. You were the same person before and after, and you will continue to be that person regardless of a virus or anything. Because you know what? You're not going to go through life. No one's going to go through life without getting at least one virus. A cold is a virus. No one's going through life without getting something.
I want to meet that person. I want to meet that person who made it through life without getting anything. That would be...
Was the bubble person?
That'd be a conversation.
Live in a bubble?
Yeah, they'd be like, yeah, I got this thing I developed called bubblitis. That was so terrible. Okay, so we got to talk about what you originally reached out about, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good.
We already talked about it.
All right, I wanted to make sure that we did before moving on. It seems like this equivocal status is something worth exploring more, like not necessarily in this episode, but something worth me bringing up as I continue to get more information. Like I just did this survey of 50 questions, and there's a lot of stories that are told from the data that I've collected. And so I'm going to be presenting this to the health care community, and I want answers. Like these questions that I've asked, all they really did was give us support for the qualitative data that comes through this podcast. So 1,148 people having taken this survey has really helped, because now I can say, hey, my podcast and this data reflect one another. So like the percentage of men, the percentage of Black people, and the percentage of white people who have been on the podcast, like it is amazing to me how accurately this survey reflects the podcast. And so now I feel more confident when I speak to these things. I know what I'm talking about. I know that I can advocate on behalf of our community, because this is what's reflected not only in these kinds of conversations where we're collecting qualitative data, but now on paper where there's quantitative data, where people are able to share who normally wouldn't even entertain a conversation out loud about herpes, but they're able to put themselves out there in a way that is going to be useful for how we challenge the stigma and just really transition the overall conception or perception of the herpes virus, and then people who are living with the herpes virus.
Yes, I actually did the survey, but there wasn't questions specifically for equivocal, so I labeled myself as positive asymptomatic. And then I can't remember, but I don't know if there was really a lot of questions on like a follow-up for medical professionals. Oh. I think that should be talked about as well, because from my experience, when I was told I was equivocal, or even the first time when I was told I was positive, it was just, okay, this is what it is, and that was it. Like this is common, and then that they moved on. There was like no in-depth conversation, no resources, no nothing. And then when I spoke with other people in the HSV community, they kind of echoed that same experience of, well, my doctor didn't even tell me. I had to call again just to figure out where that result was for that. Or they called me and they said, oh, you're good, and then I asked them, I'm like, oh, okay, but you didn't tell me about my status for the HSV. And then they told them that they had it.
Yeah. Follow up from the doctor. I didn't have that on there. I guess like I want to make sure that I state what my intention was with the survey. And it was really just to ask the questions that people from the community wanted answers to. And then with that information that came in, be able to present this to the people who can get us the answers that I'm unable to get. So like when we talk about transmission rates, when we talk about where we talk about like the effectiveness of antivirals. Like these are obviously things that I can't cover, but I can figure out who has HSV1 or 2. What was your interaction like with the healthcare providers? How's disclosing for you? How do you respond to certain things? How was your mental health? These are the types of bits of information that I can bring to the table and go, hey, I know that all of the money is in HIV. Like that's great. Like we're doing something about that. But like, what about these people? Like suicide is an epidemic. And when we look at this information, there are people who've attempted suicide that took this survey, and a huge number of people had suicide ideation. I don't remember exactly what the number is, so I don't want to butcher it, but I know that it was red and blue. It was either you did think about it or you didn't, and a lot of it was blue, which meant yes, you thought about it. So there's something there to be said about why it's important for us to integrate these post-STI diagnosis support resources with STD prevention efforts so that we have something new that's integrated to give people what they need upon diagnosis to move forward in a way that allows for them to confidently disclose and know where to go if they need additional support and resources that the healthcare provider just isn't able to give them in that moment.
Yes. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. And we'll link to that survey. Well, you can go to the website. The survey's on there. It's just going to be there. So if anyone wants to look at that, download it and use it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I looked at a couple, when I did it, and then I think I did it through, there's like a link on YouTube or something, and I did it that way. And then I saw some of your results on the Instagram, so.
Cool. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you took the survey and you checked it out. So I hope that it's something that's useful.
Yes. Before, I don't know if you're going to end the podcast soon, but I did want to tell you the articles that I looked up that talked about HSV and HSV1 and HSV2. And some of the things that I found in there was just basically referencing how nearly 60% of new genital herpes cases are from HSV1.
Oh.
And so the stigma of people being like, well, I'm HSV1, and that's automatically deemed as cold sores, you're realizing that it's not necessarily true. I mean, new cases are showing you that that's not true.
Yeah.
And that was from a survey done in 2019.
Can you send me that? Send me the articles that you have, and I will link those in the show notes. You don't have to do it now. But just email the articles to me, and I'll link them in the show notes.
Yeah.
Was there more to that before I move forward?
Oh, no, that was it. I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget, because as we were talking about people needing resources and wanting to know, like, the actual statistics and what that looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that we remember to put that in there.
Perfect. Well, that is all I got for you. Is there anything else you want to leave us with before I let you go? Rita?
No, as I said, just kind of for anyone who is positive, realizing that you are still that amazing, great person that you are. You don't let someone's perception of you dictate how you feel about yourself. Okay. Realizing that and this, I think you've heard this before, but a rejection is a redirection. That person did not need to be in your life at that moment, and that's fine. You will find someone who does love and care for you and will respect you and not treat you as a risk or someone dirty. You will find that, and that's fine. You don't have to feel like you have to only date someone who is positive.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your energy. And like I said, whenever you get a chance, just email me the articles and I'll link them in the show notes.
All right. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Me too. I'm glad we were able to do this with such a quick turnaround time too.
Right. If you ever want to do it again, I know you have other people, but I'm always down.
Well, you're a therapist, so we're going to talk. We'll be in contact. So.
Okay, great.
All right. Bye. that concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please like, rate, review, subscribe to, share this podcast on whatever platform you listen on, and feel free to check us out at www.spfpp.org. You can check out the 2021 HSV survey conducted by someone who does surveys for a living. She helped me with creating it and getting the questions in a way that spit out charts and graphs and all that pretty stuff to support you in disclosures and navigating stigma, and just giving you an accurate reflection of where we are today with our community. You can donate to help us continue to pay for people to get therapy, and check out those exit interview episodes as well, so that you can get a feel for what's going on in the group therapy and have an inside look at what we're doing at Something Positive for Positive People. Till next time, stay sex positive.